They tried to steal my land, so I sold it to a developer and built a prison in their backyard. The bulldozer rumbled onto Jack Tanner's land, ready to tear it apart for a highway. But as the dust settled, the workers froze. Someone had already broken ground. Not for roads, but for a prison. Jack had sold them a nightmare, and now Graves Corp's empire was crumbling. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Jack Tanner stood at the edge of his land, the wind tugging at the worn denim of his jeans, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the stretch of rolling hills that had defined his life. He could almost hear the voices of his father and grandfather in the rustling of the trees, their legacy etched into every inch of soil, every stone, every blade of grass. They had worked this land with their hands, carving out a living from the stubborn earth that had stubbornly given back. Now, that legacy was under siege. The first letter had come like a polite invitation, a corporate letterhead promising a generous buyout, a polite suggestion that he consider parting with what he had worked his entire life to preserve. It seemed innocent enough. A nice offer, they said. A better future, they promised. It wasn't the first time some company had shown interest in buying land in the area. But Jack had never considered selling. His farm wasn't just property. It was his past, his family's story, and the future he intended to build. Ignoring the letter had seemed easy enough. There was no need to give it more thought. But when the second letter came, Jack felt a flicker of discomfort. He knew these firms. They were faceless, hungry, always circling for opportunity. Still, he shoved it aside. He had more pressing matters: cattle to tend to, fences to mend, his own sense of peace to maintain. But they didn't let up. The third letter came in a thick envelope, complete with glossy brochures showing off pristine developments in other parts of the state. They'd built mansions, golf courses, and shopping centers, they bragged. The future, they said, was built on change, on progress. Then came the phone calls. They started late at night, when Jack was alone in the quiet of his living room, the dim glow of the television casting shadows over the faded wallpaper. The first few calls were nothing more than heavy breathing on the other end of the line. But as the days passed, the calls became more direct, more menacing. The voice on the other end always had the same cold tone, distant, professional, but unmistakably threatening. "You're not thinking of making this harder, are you, Mr. Tanner?" It was only after the bulldozer appeared that Jack realized the depth of their intention. His land, his family's history, was no longer worth a generous offer. It was worth whatever they could turn it into. They didn't care about the sweat, the memories, the years of labor poured into that land. They saw it as something to be cleared away, bulldozed into oblivion, a line item on a spreadsheet. He watched as the massive machine began grinding its way toward his fields, tearing through the earth like it was nothing. The weight of it hit him like a punch to the gut. These were not people who cared about a family's history or the traditions that ran deep in the soil. They cared only about profit, about the land's potential as a commodity, as something that could be reshaped into something new, something that could fill their pockets. Jack's mind raced, his blood thick with anger. He could feel the rage building inside him, a hot fury burning through his veins. This was more than an offer. This was an assault on everything he stood for. They wanted his land, but they wanted more than that. They wanted to erase the past, to sever the connection between the land and the people who had given their lives to it. He wasn't just fighting for property anymore. He was fighting for his family's history, for the very idea of what it meant to belong somewhere, to have roots that ran deeper than money. The bulldozer had to go, but Jack wasn't going to let them take what was his without a fight. He might have been just one man, but he had something they didn't: the unshakable resolve to defend what was his. They were playing a game of numbers, but Jack Tanner wasn't about to be another statistic. He wasn't a pawn, and he sure as hell wasn't going to let anyone steal his legacy without facing the consequences. This wasn't just a battle for land anymore. This was a war, and Jack had no intention of losing. The night was thick with silence, the kind of stillness that hung heavy in the air when everything seemed poised to change. Jack Tanner sat on the weathered porch swing, the creaking of the wood beneath him the only sound as the summer air thickened with humidity. The moon, a pale ghost in the sky, cast its light over the land. His land. The land that had been passed down through generations, now threatened by a corporation with a bottomless thirst for profit. His fists clenched against the railing, the rough wood biting into his skin as the weight of what was happening pressed in on him. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was the annihilation of everything he had ever known. Diane Collins was a force of nature. She wasn't the kind to back down from a fight, and if there was one thing Jack appreciated more than anything, it was her resolve. She came to him with a fire in her eyes, determination in every word. They weren't going to let Graves Corp steamroll them. Together, they pored over every document, every law, every obscure zoning ordinance that could give them even the slightest edge. Jack hadn't realized how far the corporation had reached, how deeply they had infiltrated local politics and the legal system. But Diane was relentless, scratching at every surface, digging into every corner for a crack that could bring down the whole empire they were up against. It wasn't just a legal fight anymore. It was a war of wills. Diane fought with the tenacity of a bulldog, while Jack fought with something far more personal, more visceral. He wasn't just defending a piece of land. He was defending his family's history, his birthright, and the very idea of what it meant to own something that could never be bought or sold. The longer they fought, the more Jack realized how deeply this war had become embedded in his bones. They were pushing him into a corner, trying to force him to bend, to surrender. But Graves Corp wasn't going to make this easy. They weren't just throwing legal jargon and loopholes his way. They were playing a psychological game too. Their lawyers weren't content with mere facts and figures. They knew how to tug at the emotional strings, how to paint Jack as an obstacle, a relic of the past that was standing in the way of progress. Think of the community, they told him. Think of the jobs this highway will create. But the words didn't move him. Jack had spent his whole life digging into the earth, tending to his fields, and he wasn't about to let some corporate sharks come in and claim it as their own because they thought it was their right to change the world on their terms. The rumors started soon after. Whispers that Jack's land was toxic, that it was a hazard to the environment, that it was better for the community to sell and allow Graves Corp to clean up the mess. It wasn't true, of course. Jack knew every inch of his land, but the lies began to spread, and soon even the locals who had once called him a friend were questioning the stability of his farm. They were trying to isolate him, to turn his own community against him. The pressure mounted, but Jack stood firm. He would not be moved. He would not be forced into submission. His land was not for sale, not to them. And then came the call from Diane. Jack could hear the urgency in her voice, the strain of a battle fought on too many fronts. Graves Corp was moving forward with their plans. Highway construction proceeding, regardless of any objection, any legal challenge. It didn't matter what Jack said, or what Diane found in the laws. The developers were pushing forward, confident that they could bulldoze their way through anything. Laws, morals, even people. They thought they could break him. But Jack Tanner wasn't like other men. He wasn't a corporate pawn or a lawyer playing by their rules. He was a man who had bled for every inch of this land, who had built something real, something that couldn't be erased by legal maneuvering or corporate greed. As he stood there, the wind kicking up the dust around him, an idea began to unfurl in his mind. If they wanted to take his farm, he would let them, but not in the way they thought, not in the way they expected. They wanted his land? Fine, but not on their terms, not without a cost. Jack wasn't done fighting. In fact, he was just getting started. The Battle of Wills had begun, and Jack Tanner was about to turn the tide. The land Jack Tanner had fought so hard to keep wasn't just a place. It was his bloodline, his soul, and as the bulldozers approached, the thought of them reducing his inheritance to rubble, turning it into something soulless and corporate, twisted a rage deep within him, a rage that needed to find an outlet, a way to show them just how far they'd pushed him. It wasn't enough to resist. He needed to make them regret their arrogance. He needed to do something that would hit them where it hurt most, in the very heart of their greed. Jack's plan was a gamble, dangerous, bold, and intricate. It wasn't just a response to their intrusion. It was an act of retribution, a move that would echo across the corporate world. He started by reaching out to a different kind of developer, one with an entirely different vision. The idea wasn't new. Private prisons were already a growing industry, a grotesque symbiosis of profit and punishment. And Jack had heard whispers about an investor eager to expand. So he sold portions of his farm to a developer willing to turn it into a state-of-the-art facility. A for-profit prison, a monument to the very system that had tried to tear him apart. Every detail of the sale was calculated. He sold to a developer who understood the stakes, who wasn't interested in long-term development or the community. He only wanted the land for one thing: a business. Jack made sure the deal was airtight, that no one could trace it back to him for months, maybe years. No one, not even Diane, knew what he was planning. The day the bulldozers rolled in, the noise of their engines shaking the earth beneath Jack's feet, he watched with a twisted sense of satisfaction. They thought it was business as usual. They thought they had won. But then they saw it. The chain-link fences, the security cameras, the concrete foundations already being laid. The workers standing around with blueprints that were not for a highway but for a prison. Jack had sold his land, but not to Graves Corp. No, this was something far more disruptive. When the news hit Graves Corp's boardrooms, it came in the form of a sealed envelope, an unassuming piece of paper with a simple message: "Enjoy your new neighbors." Inside, a stack of contracts meticulously signed, showing the transfer of land for the construction of a private prison. The signatures were in order, the project had begun, and there was nothing Graves Corp could do about it. Their dream of a highway, their bulldozer in the dirt, was now nothing more than a forgotten relic. At first, it felt like chaos. The highway project screeched to a halt, a bureaucratic nightmare unfolding in real time. Construction permits were revoked, environmental assessments overturned, and the project, which had seemed so inevitable, was now tied up in litigation, caught in the machinery of its own failure. But that wasn't the end of it. Jack's revenge wasn't just about halting progress, it was about creating something that would haunt Graves Corp for years. The prison that rose on his land became more than just a facility. It became a living, breathing monument to their greed, to the world they had tried to impose on him. Every day the facility expanded. The cold steel walls that had once been a symbol of punishment and control now became the embodiment of Jack's vengeance. Graves Corp could no longer pretend they were the masters of this land. They could no longer control the narrative or dictate what would happen here. The prison was a reminder, a physical manifestation of the price they had paid for trying to swallow up a piece of history they couldn't understand. Jack Tanner watched it all unfold from his porch. It wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about a battle of wills, of what happened when a man decided he wouldn't bend. The prison stood as a testament to that. And Graves Corp? They could only watch as their plans crumbled, as the land they had sought to control became a thorn in their side, a reminder of their failure. Jack didn't just want to win. He wanted them to feel the weight of their mistake, to watch their future unravel in slow, poetic fashion. And in the end, that was exactly what they got. The prison grew like a wound on the land, each new tower and barbed wire fence a symbol of Jack Tanner's defiance. He watched it rise slowly, like some cold, mechanical beast with no heart, consuming the very space he had once walked freely, worked the soil with his hands, and let his dogs run wild. The fences that surrounded the prison felt like a constant reminder of the land he had nearly lost. But now Now those fences were no longer a barrier to his freedom. They were his victory. A private prison in the heart of West Virginia, all built on the land that Graves Corp had sought to seize. It wasn't just about taking back what was his. It was about making them feel every inch of their failure. Jack would drive by sometimes, slow his truck down as he passed the growing complex. The sight of the high walls, the guards patrolling the perimeter, the solitary watchtowers reaching up to the sky, it all filled him with a strange sense of satisfaction, as if the land had somehow become his weapon, forged in revenge. Every guard who walked those grounds was a ghost of Graves Corp's greed, a reminder of the faceless corporation that had tried to steal from him. They had taken his farm, but he had turned their ambition into their greatest nightmare. And it wasn't just the construction that Jack reveled in. No, it was the slow realization creeping through Graves Corp's boardrooms. Their dream of a highway to expand their empire had been replaced by a reality they never saw coming. The backlash from the local communities was louder than any bulldozer. Protests sprang up like wildfire, fueled by every local resident who saw the prison as a scar on their land, a blight on their community. They rallied, they spoke out, they made their voices impossible to ignore. Graves Corp's clean, glossy image began to tarnish as the outcry grew, and with every protest, with every news article printed, the company's plans crumbled further. But it wasn't just public outrage that sealed their fate. It was the money. The prison wasn't just a symbol, it was a financial engine. The contracts, the long-term deals, the stream of income from housing prisoners, each dollar that flowed in was a reminder of what Graves Corp had lost. Jack didn't just fight for the land, he fought for the power to dictate its future. And now, with the prison thriving, the property taxes were rolling in, going straight into Jack's pocket. He wasn't just a man who had held on to his land. He had turned their vision of the future into his own, one that bled money and resentment. Every dollar they spent to fight the prison, every lawsuit they filed, was another nail in their coffin. Jack knew the game was over. He hadn't just fought for survival, he had fought for dominance. And now Graves Corp was paying the price. Graves Corp's boardrooms, once full of men in suits talking about progress and development, now had to confront the harsh truth. Their plans had backfired. What they thought would be a symbol of power had become a monument to their failure. The land they'd once coveted, the land they had thought they could easily control, had become their prison, their curse. The sweet irony wasn't lost on Jack. They had wanted to pave over him, but in the end, it was they who had been buried by their own ambition. Justice had been served, but it wasn't the kind that came with a gavel and a judge's decree. It came with time, with patience, and with the kind of deep-rooted satisfaction that only those who had lived through struggle could understand. Jack Tanner had lost everything, but he had won something far greater. His place in the world, unshakable and irrevocable. In the end, they hadn't just tried to steal from him, they had made him the architect of their downfall. And now, as the prison stood tall on the land he had fought for, he knew there was no coming back from this. The land had become something else entirely, something Graves Corp could never erase, no matter how much money they threw at it. The twisted justice of fate had been fulfilled, and Jack was its unyielding hand.